The desert wind carried the scent of sage and danger as Jake Morrison rode his horse across the rocky terrain of Arizona Territory. The year was 1885, and the Apache Wars had left deep scars on the land and its people. Jake had been working as a ranch hand at the Double Creek Ranch for 3 years, trying to forget the memories of his time as a cavalry scout. The sun was setting behind the Red Mountains when Jake first saw her. She stood near the old water well behind the ranch house, her long black hair braided with small silver ornaments that caught the last rays of sunlight. Her buckskin dress was decorated with intricate beadwork, and she moved with the quiet grace of someone who belonged to the wilderness. Jake pulled his horse to a stop and watched from a distance. Apache people rarely came this close to the ranch settlements anymore. Most had been forced onto reservations or had fled deeper into the mountains. This woman seemed different, though. She wasn't hiding or running. She stood tall and proud, as if she had every right to be there. "You can come closer," she said without turning around. Her English was clear but carried the musical accent of her native tongue. "I know you have been watching me." Jake dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. He had learned during his scout days that Apache people could sense danger from great distances. "I'm sorry, miss. I didn't mean to spy on you. I work here at the ranch." She turned to face him, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. Her eyes were the color of dark amber, and her face held both strength and sadness. She appeared to be in her early 20s, but her eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older. "My name is Ayana," she said. "It means eternal blossom in my language. I have come here because I need water for my journey." "Journey?" Jake asked, stepping closer to the well. "Where are you headed? It's not safe for Apache people to travel alone these days." Ayana's expression grew troubled. "I know the dangers, but I must go. My people are in great need, and I carry medicine that could save many lives." Jake noticed the leather pouch she carried across her shoulder. It was old and worn, decorated with symbols he didn't recognize. "What kind of medicine?" "There is a sickness spreading through my people on the reservation," Ayana explained. "The government doctors do not understand it, and many have already died. My grandmother taught me the old ways of healing, and I know which plants can cure this illness. But the medicine plants only grow in the sacred mountains far from here." "That's dangerous territory," Jake said, concern growing in his voice. "There are wild animals, and the terrain is treacherous. Plus, there are still army patrols looking for Apache people who leave the reservation." Ayana nodded gravely. "I understand the risks, but if I do not try, my people will continue to suffer. Children, elders, everyone is at risk. I am their only hope." Jake felt a strange pull in his chest. He had seen too much suffering during the Apache Wars, and the guilt still haunted him. Here was a chance to help instead of harm. "Let me come with you. I know these mountains better than most, and I can help you avoid the army patrols." "Why would you help me?" Ayana asked, studying his face carefully. "Most white men see Apache people as enemies." Jake was quiet for a moment, remembering the faces of Apache families he had helped track down during his cavalry days. "Because I've done things I'm not proud of. Maybe helping you is a way to balance the scales." Ayana seemed to understand the pain in his voice. She nodded slowly. "I cannot ask you to risk your life for strangers." "You're not asking," Jake replied. "I'm offering." Before Ayana could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Jake's boss, Mr. Henderson, was riding toward them with 2 other ranch hands. Henderson was a hard man who had fought in the Indian Wars and had little love for Apache people. "Morrison!" Henderson called out angrily. "What are you doing talking to that Apache woman? Don't you know it's illegal for them to be off the reservation?" Jake stepped protectively in front of Ayana. "She just needs water, Mr. Henderson. She's not causing any trouble." Henderson dismounted, his hand resting on his gun. "Apache people are always trouble. We need to report this to the sheriff immediately." "Please," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "She's just one woman trying to help her people. There's no harm in letting her take some water and go on her way." "No harm?" Henderson laughed bitterly. "You weren't here during the worst of the Apache raids, Morrison. These people are dangerous, no matter how peaceful they might seem." Ayana spoke up, her voice steady despite the obvious danger. "I understand your fear, but I seek only to heal, not to harm. My people are dying, and I carry medicine that could save them." Henderson's expression didn't soften. "That's not my problem. The law is the law, and Apache people belong on the reservation. If they're dying, that's for the government doctors to handle. The government doctors don't know how to treat this sickness, Ayana said firmly. They have tried their medicine, but it does not work. Only the old ways can cure this illness. One of the other ranch hands, a young man named Tommy, spoke up. Maybe we should just let her go, Mr. Henderson. She's not hurting anyone. Henderson turned on Tommy with fury. Are you questioning my judgment, boy? I've been fighting Apache people longer than you've been alive. I know how dangerous they can be. Jake could see the situation was getting worse by the minute. He needed to do something to protect Ayana, but he also couldn't afford to lose his job. The ranch was the only place that had given him work after he left the cavalry. Mr. Henderson, Jake said carefully, what if I escort her back toward the reservation? That way we make sure she's heading in the right direction, and we don't have to involve the sheriff. Henderson considered this for a moment. You'd be willing to waste a day riding with an Apache? If it keeps everyone safe and avoids trouble with the law, yes. Ayana looked at Jake with surprise. She hadn't expected him to risk his job for her. Henderson finally nodded reluctantly. Fine. But I want her off my property before dawn, and I want your word that you'll see her safely away from here. You have my word, Jake said. Henderson and his men rode away, leaving Jake and Ayana alone again. The sun had fully set now, and stars were beginning to appear in the clear desert sky. Thank you, Ayana said quietly, but I cannot let you risk your job for me. I will leave tonight as planned. About that, Jake said. I meant what I said earlier about helping you reach the sacred mountains. Henderson thinks I'm escorting you back to the reservation, but there's no reason we can't take a longer route. Ayana shook her head. You do not understand the dangers. The journey to the sacred mountains will take many days through hostile territory. There are wild animals, dangerous weather, and army patrols. If you are caught helping me, you could be arrested or worse. I've faced danger before, Jake replied, and I know these mountains better than most. I was a cavalry scout for 5 years before I came to work here. I know all the hidden trails and water sources. Why are you really willing to do this? Ayana asked. There must be more to your story than wanting to balance the scales. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. During my time as a scout, I helped track down Apache families who had left the reservation. Most of them were just trying to find food or visit sacred places. But the army treated them all as hostiles. I saw children separated from their parents, elders who died on forced marches back to the reservation. I told myself I was just doing my job, but I knew it was wrong. Ayana listened without judgment as Jake continued. There was one family in particular, a grandmother with 3 young children. They had left the reservation because one of the children was sick, and they were trying to reach a medicine woman in the mountains. We caught them just 2 days away from their destination. What happened to them? Ayana asked softly. The grandmother died during the march back to the reservation. The sick child died 3 days later. I kept thinking that if I just looked the other way, if I had let them continue their journey, those lives might have been saved. Ayana placed her hand gently on Jake's arm. You cannot carry the weight of all the world's suffering, Jake Morrison. But I understand why you want to help me. So you'll let me come with you? Ayana looked toward the dark mountains in the distance. The journey is very dangerous, and I cannot promise we will both survive. Are you certain this is what you want to do? Jake nodded without hesitation. I'm certain. Then we must prepare carefully, Ayana said. I must go tonight, as I told your boss, but we will need supplies, weapons, and a plan for avoiding the army patrols. They spent the next hour making preparations. Jake gathered food, water, ammunition, and camping supplies from the ranch storehouse. He left a note for Henderson saying that he was escorting the Apache woman to the reservation and would return in a few days. Ayana showed Jake her map, drawn on a piece of deer hide. It showed the location of the sacred mountains where the healing plants grew, as well as dangerous areas to avoid and safe places to rest. The medicine plants only bloom for a short time, she explained. If we do not reach them within 10 days, they will wither and become useless. That is why I cannot wait any longer. As they prepared to leave, Jake found himself studying Ayana's face in the moonlight. There was something about her that drew him in, something beyond her obvious courage and determination. She carried herself with a dignity that reminded him of the Apache warriors he had once fought against. But there was also a gentleness in her eyes that spoke of her calling as a healer. Are you ready? Ayana asked, mounting her horse. Jake swung up onto his own mount and nodded. Ready? They rode away from the ranch under the cover of darkness, heading not toward the reservation but toward the wild mountains that held both promise and peril. Behind them, the lights of the ranch house grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The desert night was filled with the sounds of coyotes calling to each other across the vast emptiness. Jake and Ayana rode in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the dangerous journey ahead. As they climbed higher into the foothills, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would change both of their lives forever. He didn't know yet how right he was. The second day of their journey brought new challenges that tested both Jake's knowledge of the wilderness and Ayana's determination to save her people. They had managed to avoid the main trails where army patrols might spot them, but the hidden paths through the mountains were treacherous and slow. Jake led the way through narrow canyon passages that seemed to squeeze tighter with each mile. The walls rose high above them, blocking out most of the sunlight and creating an eerie twilight even at midday. Their horses' hooves echoed off the stone walls, and Jake worried the sound might carry to unfriendly ears. "How much farther through this canyon?" Ayana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Another 2 hours at least," Jake replied, checking the position of the sun through the narrow gap above. "But once we're through, we'll have good cover in the pine forests on the other side." Ayana nodded, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. They were already behind schedule. The rocky terrain had forced them to move more slowly than she had hoped, and every delay brought them closer to missing the brief, blooming period of the healing plants. As they emerged from the canyon late that afternoon, Jake spotted smoke rising from a valley below them. He quickly motioned for Ayana to stop and dismount behind a cluster of large boulders. "Army patrol," he whispered, pulling out his field glasses to get a better look. "Looks like they've made camp for the night." Ayana crawled up beside him and peered down at the valley. She could see at least a dozen soldiers around their campfire, their horses picketed nearby. "Can we go around them?" Jake studied the terrain carefully. "We can, but it'll add another full day to our journey. The only other route through these mountains requires us to cross a river that's probably running high from the spring snowmelt. Then we must try the river crossing," Ayana said without hesitation. "I cannot afford to lose another day." Jake admired her determination, but he was worried about the risks. "Ayana, that river crossing is dangerous even in good conditions. With the spring runoff, it could be deadly." "My people are dying every day I delay," she replied firmly. "I must take the risk." They backtracked through the canyon and took a different path that led toward the rushing mountain river. As they got closer, Jake's concerns proved justified. The river was running fast and high, carrying fallen trees and debris from higher in the mountains. "It's worse than I thought," Jake said, studying the churning water. "Even if we make it across, our supplies could get soaked and ruined." Ayana dismounted and walked to the river's edge. She knelt down and placed her hand in the icy water, closing her eyes as if listening to something Jake couldn't hear. "My grandmother taught me that water has its own spirit," she said. "It can be dangerous, but it can also be helpful if you approach it with respect." Jake watched as Ayana walked along the riverbank, studying the current and the rocks beneath the surface. After several minutes, she pointed to a spot about 100 yards upstream. "There," she said. "The water is deeper there, but the current is not as strong. If we enter at the right angle, the river will help carry us across." Jake looked where she was pointing and had to admit she was right. The crossing point she had chosen was better than anything he had spotted. "How did you know to look there?" "My people have been traveling these mountains for many generations," Ayana explained. "We learned to read the signs that others miss." They prepared for the crossing carefully, wrapping their weapons and supplies in waterproof hides that Ayana carried in her pack. Jake was impressed by how well prepared she was for this journey. She had thought of details that even his cavalry training hadn't covered. As they led their horses into the icy water, Jake felt the powerful current trying to knock him off his feet. The water quickly rose to his waist, and he could see his horse struggling against the flow. Ayana moved through the water with surprising confidence, speaking softly to her horse in Apache. The animal seemed to calm at the sound of her voice and followed her lead through the dangerous crossing. Halfway across, Jake's horse stumbled on a hidden rock and nearly went down. Jake grabbed the saddle horn and managed to keep his footing, but he lost his grip on some of their supplies. He watched helplessly as a bag of food disappeared downstream. "Keep moving!" Ayana called out over the noise of the rushing water. "Don't stop or the current will sweep you away." They made it to the far shore, exhausted and soaked, but alive. Jake collapsed on the rocky bank, breathing hard from the effort and the cold. Ayana, though also exhausted, immediately began checking their remaining supplies. "We lost some food," Jake said when he caught his breath, "but the weapons and medicine supplies stayed dry. We can hunt for fresh meat," Ayana replied. "Practically, the important thing is that we're across." They made camp that night in a sheltered grove of pine trees, building a small fire to dry their clothes and warm themselves. As they shared a simple meal of dried meat and wild plants that Ayana had gathered, Jake found himself watching her face in the firelight. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said. "The one who taught you about healing." Ayana's expression softened. Her name was Itzayana. She was known throughout our tribe as a powerful medicine woman. She could cure sicknesses that baffled everyone else, and she knew the location of every healing plant in these mountains. "Is she still alive?" Ayana shook her head sadly. "She died 2 years ago, during the first outbreak of this sickness that now plagues my people. She tried everything she knew, but this illness was unlike anything she had seen before. With her last breath, she told me that the cure could only be found in the sacred mountains, in a plant that blooms for only a few days each year." "How do you know which plant she meant?" "She described it to me in great detail before she died. A flower that grows only at high altitude, with blue petals that glow like starlight in the moonlight. She said I would know it when I saw it." Ayana paused, staring into the fire. "I have to believe she was right. Too many lives depend on it." Jake could hear the weight of responsibility in her voice. "You're very brave to attempt this journey alone." "I was not supposed to be alone," Ayana admitted. "My brother was going to come with me, but he fell ill with the same sickness I'm trying to cure. He's one of the reasons I must succeed." They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their past and their hopes for the future. Jake learned that Ayana had been trained not just in medicine, but also in the old Apache ways of tracking, hunting, and surviving in the wilderness. She had skills that rivaled those of the best scouts he had known. Ayana, in turn, learned more about Jake's time as a cavalry scout and his growing disillusionment with the Army's treatment of Apache people. She could see that he was a man trying to find redemption for past actions he regretted. "Do you think your people will accept my help?" Jake asked as they prepared to sleep. "Some will be suspicious," Ayana answered honestly. "They have good reason to distrust white men. But if you help me save their lives, they will come to see you as a friend." The next morning brought new dangers. They awoke to find mountain lion tracks around their campsite. Big Cat had come close enough to investigate their camp, but had apparently decided they weren't easy prey. "She's following us," Ayana said, studying the tracks. "Mountain lions are curious about travelers in their territory." Jake checked his rifle and made sure it was loaded. "Will she attack?" "Only if she feels threatened or if she's very hungry. We should make noise as we travel and avoid surprising her." They broke camp quickly and continued their journey up into the higher mountains. The trail became steeper and more difficult, forcing them to lead their horses on foot through some sections. As they climbed higher, the air became thinner and colder. Jake, who was used to the lower elevations around the ranch, found himself breathing hard during the steep climbs. Ayana, who had grown up in these mountains, seemed unaffected by the altitude. Late that afternoon, they heard the sound of gunshots echoing through the mountains. Jake immediately pulled Ayana behind a large boulder and listened carefully. "Army patrol," he whispered. "Sounds like they're hunting for something." "Or someone," Ayana added grimly. They stayed hidden until the sounds faded away, then carefully continued their journey. The encounter reminded them both that they were not just racing against time to reach the healing plants, but also trying to avoid capture by soldiers who would see Ayana as a runaway Apache and Jake as someone aiding a fugitive. As the sun began to set, they reached a high meadow that offered a spectacular view of the surrounding mountains. In the distance, Jake could see snow-capped peaks that seemed to touch the sky. "How much farther?" he asked. Ayana consulted her hide map and pointed toward the highest peaks. 2 more days if we can maintain this pace. The sacred mountains are there, beyond that ridge." Jake studied the distant peaks and felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. They were getting close to their goal, but the most dangerous part of their journey still lay ahead. The high mountains were home to not just healing plants, but also harsh weather, dangerous animals, and the possibility of getting lost in terrain that few white men had ever seen. That night, as they made camp in the shelter of some large rocks, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He mentioned it to Ayana, who nodded grimly. "I feel it too," she said, "but I don't think it's the mountain lion or soldiers. There's something else out there." "What do you think it is?" Ayana was quiet for a moment. listening to the sounds of the night. My people believe these mountains are protected by spirits. Perhaps they're deciding whether to help us or hinder us. Jake didn't know what to make of that, but he trusted Ayana's instincts. As he settled down for sleep, his rifle within easy reach, he found himself hoping that if there really were mountain spirits, they would look favorably on their mission of healing. The next morning would bring them face to face with both the beauty and the terror that waited in the sacred mountains. The seventh day of their journey brought them to the edge of the sacred mountains, but it also brought the most dangerous challenge they had yet faced. As they climbed through the pre-dawn darkness, following a narrow trail that seemed to disappear and reappear among the rocks, they heard the sound that every traveler in Apache territory feared most: war drums. Jake and Ayana froze in place, listening to the rhythmic beating that echoed off the mountain walls. The drums were close, much closer than either of them had expected to encounter other Apache people. "Those are not my people," Ayana whispered, her face pale in the moonlight. "That rhythm belongs to a different band, one that has not made peace with the white soldiers." Jake felt his heart racing. He had heard those same drums during his cavalry days, usually right before an attack. "What do we do?" Ayana closed her eyes and listened more carefully to the drum pattern. "They are not war drums," she said after a moment, relief evident in her voice. "They are ceremonial drums." "Someone is performing a healing ritual." "For who?" "I don't know, but if there are Apache people here performing healing ceremonies, it means we are very close to the sacred places. The spirits of these mountains do not allow such rituals except in places of great power." They continued climbing as the drums continued their steady rhythm. As the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, they saw smoke rising from a hidden valley just ahead of them. Ayana made a decision that surprised Jake. "I must approach them and ask for their help. If they are performing healing ceremonies, they may know exactly where to find the plants I need." "That's incredibly dangerous," Jake protested. "You said yourself they haven't made peace with white soldiers. If they see me with you, then you must stay hidden while I go alone." Jake shook his head firmly. "We've come this far together. I'm not letting you face unknown dangers alone now." Ayana studied his face and saw the determination there. After a moment, she nodded. "Very well, but you must follow my lead exactly. These people will be suspicious of any white man, but especially one who is a cavalry scout." They approached the hidden valley carefully, leading their horses and staying in the cover of rocks and trees. As they got closer, they could see a small camp with perhaps 20 Apache people gathered around a central fire. An elderly medicine man was chanting while several people tended to someone lying on a blanket near the fire. Ayana called out in Apache, announcing her presence and asking for permission to enter the camp. The chanting stopped immediately, and several warriors grabbed their weapons. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but Ayana quickly motioned for him to keep his hands visible and non-threatening. An elderly woman emerged from the group and walked toward them. She was small and wrinkled, but she carried herself with obvious authority. Her eyes were sharp as they studied first Ayana, then Jake. The old woman spoke rapidly in Apache, and Ayana responded in the same language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he could tell from their tones that they were discussing something important. After several minutes of conversation, Ayana turned to Jake. "This is Nalnish, a respected elder of the Chiricahua band. She says they are here because her grandson is dying from the same sickness that plagues my people on the reservation." "The same sickness?" "Yes. She says it has spread to many different Apache bands, not just those on the reservation. They came here hoping to find the old healing plants, but her grandson is too weak to travel to the highest peaks where the plants grow." Jake looked toward the sick young man by the fire. He appeared to be about 16 years old, and even from a distance Jake could see that he was gravely ill. "What did you tell her about me?" Jake asked. "I told her that you are helping me reach the sacred plants, and that you have proven yourself to be trustworthy. She is suspicious, but she is willing to listen." The old woman, Nalnish, spoke again, and this time she looked directly at Jake. "She wants to know why a white man would risk his life to help Apache people." Ayana translated. Jake thought carefully before answering. "Tell her that I have seen too much suffering caused by hatred and misunderstanding between our peoples. I believe that healing can bring us together in ways that fighting never could." Ayana translated, and Nalnish listened intently. She asked several more questions, which Ayana relayed back and forth. Finally, the old woman nodded slowly. "She says that if we can bring back the healing plants and save her grandson's life, she will know that your heart is true." Ayana explained. But she warns that the final part of our journey is the most dangerous. The sacred plants grow in a place that is guarded by ancient spirits. What does that mean exactly? Nalnish spoke again, and Ayana's expression grew troubled as she listened. She says that many people have tried to reach the sacred plants over the years, but few have succeeded. The guardian spirits test anyone who seeks the healing medicine. They look into your heart and judge whether you are worthy. And if they find you unworthy, then you become lost in the mountains forever. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Do you believe that? Ayana nodded seriously. My grandmother told me similar stories. The sacred places of my people are not just physical locations. They are places where the spirit world touches our world. Nalanish led them into the camp, where the other Apache people watched Jake with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The elderly medicine man, who was introduced as Nalnish's brother, examined the sick young man and spoke gravely to Ayana. He says the boy has perhaps 2 more days before the sickness claims his life, Ayana translated. If we can return with the medicine plants by then, he believes he can prepare a cure. The urgency of the situation was now even greater than before. They were not just racing to save Ayana's people on the reservation, but also the life of this young man. Nalnish provided them with detailed directions to the sacred grove where the healing plants grew. She also gave them a small leather pouch filled with cornmeal and turquoise beads. These are offerings for the guardian spirits, Ayana explained. She says we must approach the sacred place with proper respect and humility. They set out immediately, climbing higher into the mountains than either of them had ever been. The air was thin and cold, and patches of snow appeared despite it being late spring. Their horses struggled with the altitude, and they were forced to leave them behind and continue on foot. As they climbed higher, a landscape became increasingly strange and beautiful. They passed through groves of ancient pine trees that seemed to hum with their own energy. They crossed streams that ran crystal clear and tasted sweeter than any water either of them had ever drunk. Do you feel it? Ayana asked as they stopped to rest beside one of the magical streams. Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure he could put the feeling into words. There was something different about this place, something that made the air itself seem alive. He found himself speaking more quietly, as if they were in a great cathedral. Late that afternoon, they reached a narrow passage between 2 towering rock formations. Ayana consulted the directions Nalnish had given her and nodded toward the passage. Through there, she said. The sacred grove lies beyond. As they walked through the narrow passage, Jake felt the strange sensation of being watched more strongly than ever. The walls of the passage were covered with ancient Apache pictographs and symbols that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. They emerged into a circular valley unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The valley was perfectly round, surrounded by towering cliffs on all sides. In the center grew a grove of trees that seemed to glow with their own inner light, and scattered throughout the grove, growing in the dappled sunlight beneath the trees, were the most beautiful flowers Jake had ever seen. They had blue petals that seemed to capture and hold the light, just as Ayana's grandmother had described. We found them, Ayana whispered, her voice filled with wonder and relief. They approached the grove slowly, remembering Nalnish's warnings about the guardian spirits. As they entered the circle of trees, Jake felt a presence that was both comforting and awesome, like being in the presence of something far older and wiser than himself. Ayana knelt beside the first cluster of healing flowers and began to sing softly in Apache. Jake recognized it as a prayer of thanksgiving and respect. She carefully picked only a few flowers from each plant, making sure to leave enough for the plants to continue growing. As she worked, Jake found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Just over a week ago, he had been a simple ranch hand trying to forget his past. Now he was standing in a sacred Apache ceremonial site, helping to gather medicine that could save many lives. Jake, Ayana called softly. Look! He turned to see her pointing toward a large rock formation at the far end of the grove. Carved into the rock was an ancient pictograph showing a white man and an Apache woman standing together, their hands extended toward a cluster of blue flowers. How is that possible? Jake asked, staring at the ancient carving. My grandmother told me that the sacred places exist outside of normal time, Ayana said. Past, present, and future all meet here. Perhaps this pictograph shows not what was, but what was meant to be. They worked through the afternoon, carefully gathering the precious healing plants. Ayana sang prayers over each flower as she picked it, and Jake helped prepare the special containers that would keep the medicine fresh during their journey back. As the sun began to set, they heard the sound of distant thunder, though the sky was clear. Ayana looked up with concern. "We must leave now," she said urgently. "The spirits are telling us that our time here is finished." They packed the precious medicine and began their journey out of the sacred grove. As they walked back through the narrow passage, Jake looked back one more time at the magical valley. In the fading light, it almost seemed like it was fading away, as if it existed only for those who truly needed to find it. The journey back down the mountain was faster but no less dangerous. They traveled through the night, driven by the knowledge that the sick young man in the Apache camp was running out of time. They reached the camp just as the sun was rising on the 8th day of their journey. The young man was unconscious and barely breathing, but he was still alive. The medicine man immediately began preparing the healing potion using the sacred plants they had brought. The next several hours were tense as the medicine man worked his ancient healing arts. The entire camp waited in anxious silence, and Jake found himself praying to whatever spirits might be listening that their journey would not be in vain. Just after noon, the young man opened his eyes for the first time in days. By evening, his fever had broken, and he was able to sit up and drink broth. The healing plants had worked. The Apache people celebrated through the night, and Jake found himself welcomed as a true friend. Nalnish spoke to him through Ayana's translation. "She says that you have proven yourself to be a man of honor," Ayana told him. "She wants to know if you will stay and help her people." Jake looked around at the faces surrounding the fire, faces that no longer showed suspicion but acceptance and even gratitude. For the first time since leaving the cavalry, he felt like he had found where he belonged. "Tell her that I would be honored to help however I can," he said. But Ayana had her own responsibilities. The next morning, she prepared to continue her journey to the reservation, carrying enough of the healing medicine to treat her own people. "Will you come with me?" she asked Jake as they prepared to part ways. Jake looked into her amber eyes and saw not just a request for help, but something deeper. Over the course of their dangerous journey together, they had developed feelings for each other that went beyond friendship. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Your people will need someone who understands both Apache and white ways. And he paused, gathering his courage. "I can't imagine my future without you in it." Ayana smiled, the first truly joyful expression Jake had seen from her since they had met. "Then we will face that future together." They traveled to the reservation with a larger group now, as several of Nalish's people decided to accompany them to help distribute the medicine. When they arrived, they found the Apache community in desperate condition. The sickness had spread even further during Ayana's absence, but the healing plants worked just as effectively on the reservation as they had in the mountain camp. Within days, people who had been near death were recovering their strength. Ayana became known as a great medicine woman, following in her grandmother's footsteps. Jake, meanwhile, found his role as a bridge between two cultures. He helped negotiate with government officials for better medical supplies and food for the reservation. His knowledge of both Apache and white customs made him invaluable in preventing misunderstandings that could have led to violence. More importantly, his relationship with Ayana grew deeper with each passing month. They were married in a traditional Apache ceremony, with Nalnish herself performing the blessing. Jake learned Apache customs and language, while Ayana learned about the white world that surrounded their people. Together, they worked to build understanding between Apache and white communities. Jake used his connections from his cavalry days to arrange meetings between Apache leaders and sympathetic white officials. Ayana's reputation as a healer brought respect from both communities. Years later, when people asked Jake about how he had found his true purpose in life, he would always return to that moment by the well when Ayana had said, "I must go tonight." He couldn't let her leave alone then, and he never wanted to be apart from her again. Their dangerous journey to the sacred mountains had saved many lives, but it had also created something even more precious, a love that bridged two worlds and pointed the way toward a more peaceful future. The healing plant still grew in the sacred mountains, tended by the guardian spirits and harvested only by those pure of heart. And the pictograph showing a white man and an Apache woman standing together remained carved in stone, a prophecy fulfilled and a promise of hope for generations to come. In the end, Jake Morrison had found much more than redemption for his past. He had found his home, his purpose, and the love of his life, all because he had been brave enough to help when help was needed most.